The email arrived at 4:57 p.m. on a Friday. It was a single line, a calendar invitation from our manager, Mark, for our performance reviews the following week. No context, no great work this quarter, just a sterile, automated block dropped into our schedules. For most people at Omnicore, this was routine. For the 5 of us on Team Phoenix, it felt like a summons. My name is Sabrina, and I was the lead engineer on that team, the only all-female software engineering team at the company. If you're watching this, you probably know what it feels like to pour your soul into your work, to exceed every metric and break every record, only to be told you're just adequate. If you know that feeling, stick around. It helps to know I'm not just screaming into the void. This is the story of how 5 adequate women took a system designed to keep them in their place and used it to burn that place to the ground. It wasn't about revenge, it was about calibration. The air in the office that following week was thick with a toxic kind of cheerfulness. You could almost taste the forced smiles and smell the desperation. Performance review week at Omnicore was a corporate blood sport disguised as a development opportunity. Bonuses, promotions, and even job security were all on the line, decided by a system that was about as transparent as a brick wall. Our manager, Mark, prided himself on his high standards. That was the phrase he used. He'd lean back in his chair, steeple his fingers, and talk about the bar. The bar was always being raised. The bar was incredibly high. What he never said, but what we all knew, was that the bar had different heights depending on who was trying to clear it. Our team, which we privately called the Furies, but which was officially designated Engineering Team 7, had spent the last 2 quarters rewriting the core logic for the company's flagship logistics platform. It was a tangled mess of legacy code, a digital house of horrors that no one else wanted to touch. The male-led teams like the Spartans or the Vikings, you can see the theme here, got the glamorous new projects. They built new features with new tech. They got to stand on stage at the all-hands meetings and show off shiny user interfaces. We got the plumbing. We were sent into the sewers to fix the corroded pipes that the entire glittering city above depended on. And we were good at it. Damn good. Our project, codenamed Cerberus, involved untangling 20 years of technical debt. We increased system efficiency by 400%. We reduced server costs by 60%. We patched security vulnerabilities that had been lying dormant for a decade. Our metrics weren't just good, they were revolutionary. We had the data, the charts, the logs. The numbers were undeniable. We were the most performant team in the entire engineering division, and it wasn't even close. My review was on Wednesday. I walked into the glass-walled conference room that Mark used as his personal fiefdom. He was already there, scrolling through his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't look up when I sat down. That was the first move in his little power game. Make you wait, make you feel small. I placed my hands on the cold metal of the chair arms and kept my breathing even. I had practiced this. Calm, professional, strategic. He finally looked up, his eyes skimming over me, as if I were a piece of furniture he was considering replacing. Sabrina, he began, let's talk about your quarter. He pulled up my review on the giant monitor on the wall. A single damning phrase was highlighted in the final assessment box. Meets expectations. My heart didn't drop. It seized. It was a cold, hard clench in my chest. A physical manifestation of a reality I had been trying to deny. I stared at the words. Meets expectations. It was the corporate equivalent of a C+. It was the grade you gave to someone who showed up, did the bare minimum, and went home. It was not the grade you gave to the person who had just saved the company millions of dollars. Mark launched into his pre-rehearsed speech. It was a masterclass in condescending corporate jargon. He talked about my solid contributions and my potential for growth. He said I was a reliable member of the team, but that to reach the next level, to truly exceed, I needed to demonstrate more thought leadership. He wanted me to be more vocal in meetings. He said sometimes my ambition could be perceived as sharp-edged, and that I needed to work on my soft skills to make my male colleagues more comfortable. He was critiquing my personality, not my performance. He was punishing me for not being one of the boys. I listened, my face a mask of placid neutrality. I asked clarifying questions. I used his own language back at him. What specific data points suggest a lack of thought leadership? Can you provide an example of an instance where my ambition negatively impacted a project outcome? He would wave his hand dismissively. It's not about specific data, Sabrina. It's a feeling, a perception. It's about the optics. The entire meeting lasted 15 minutes. At the end, he smiled, a thin, patronizing smile. A solid quarter, he repeated. Keep up the good work. He had already moved on. For him, this was just another box to check. For me, it was a declaration of war. I walked out of that room, my blood running cold. I didn't go back to my desk. I walked straight to the small windowless office that the five of us shared. Maya, our database architect, was already there, her knuckles white as she stared at her screen. I didn't have to ask. I just looked at her, and she nodded once. Meets expectations. One by one, the others returned from their meetings. Chloe, our front-end wizard. Lena, our QA and security expert. And finally, Priya, our brilliant junior engineer, who was only a year out of college. Each of them had the same story, the same bland, insulting praise, the same final, damning verdict. Solid contributions. Good team player, needs to be more vocal, needs to be less vocal, needs more confidence, needs to be less aggressive. We were a collection of walking contradictions, and every single one of us, despite our record-shattering metrics, meets expectations. Later that evening, we learned that every single member of the Spartans and the Vikings had received exceeds expectations. Their projects were over budget and behind schedule, but their managers were friends with Mark. They played golf together. They were part of the club. Their teams got the bonuses. Their teams got the promotions. We got a pat on the head and a suggestion to smile more. That was the betrayal. It wasn't just about money or a title. It was about the deliberate, systematic erasure of our work. He had looked at a masterpiece and called it a doodle, and in that moment, we knew we couldn't let it stand. The next review cycle was in 6 months. We decided we were going to give Mark exactly what he wanted, a simple, easy-to-read story. We just didn't realize that the story we were writing would have a very different ending than the one he was expecting. The silence in our little office after Priya came back was heavier than anything I had ever felt. It wasn't an angry silence. It was the sound of 5 people's worth of hope being extinguished. We called our office the cave. It was an interior room, no windows, with bad ventilation and a persistent flicker in one of the overhead fluorescent lights. It was where they put the teams they didn't want to see, out of sight, out of mind. For the past year, we had filled that room with whiteboards covered in complex diagrams, with the low hum of powerful machines, and with a kind of fierce, collaborative energy that felt like a secret. Now the only sound was that damn light, buzzing like a trapped fly. Priya, the youngest of us, was the one who finally broke. She wasn't crying, not yet. She was just sitting in her chair, staring at the login screen of her computer, as if she couldn't remember her own password. Her review with Mark had been the last. He had told her she lacked the confidence to be a leader, that she needed to find her voice. This to the woman who had single-handedly identified and fixed a race condition that had been plaguing our staging servers for 3 years. a problem that 3 senior male engineers had declared unfixable. She finally looked up at us, her eyes wide with a kind of dawning horror. I think, I think I'm going to quit, she whispered. The words hung in the air, sharp and dangerous, and that was the moment everything shifted. That was the catalyst. It's one thing to endure injustice for yourself. You tell yourself to be tougher, to have thicker skin, to play the long game, but to watch someone else, someone you've mentored and seen blossom, be systematically broken down before they even have a chance to grow roots. That's a different kind of fire. I saw the same thought ripple across the faces of Maya, Chloe, and Lena. This wasn't about us anymore. It was about Priya. It was about the next Priya, and the one after that. If we let Mark do this to her, to us without a fight, we were complicit in our own erasure. We were helping him build the very walls that were boxing us in. It wasn't about revenge. I have to be clear about that. It was about survival. It was a cold, pragmatic calculation. We could not thrive in this environment. Therefore, the environment had to change, or we had to leave. But leaving felt like letting him win. It felt like admitting that he was right, that we didn't belong. No, we weren't leaving. We were going to remodel. That night, we didn't go home. We ordered pizza to the cave, and for the first time we talked, really talked, not just about Mark and the reviews, but about everything that had led to this point. The little cuts, the 1,000 paper cuts of disrespect that had been bleeding us dry for years. I thought back to my own journey at Omnicore. I'd been here for 8 years. When I started, I was the only woman on a team of 12 men. I learned to code like them, to talk like them, to swear like them. I thought if I could just be one of the boys, my work would speak for itself. For a while, it seemed to work. I got promoted. I was given more responsibility. I was the one they called at 3 a.m. when a server was on fire. I was their fixer. I remember my old boss, a decent man named Arthur, telling me before he retired, "Sabrina, you're the backbone of this division. Don't ever let them forget it." Then Arthur retired, and Mark was brought in from the outside. Mark, with his expensive suits and his talk of disruption and synergy, he saw a division that ran on my institutional knowledge and saw an opportunity. In his first month, during a major client presentation, our primary database went down. It was a catastrophic failure. I spent 36 hours straight, fueled by nothing but stale coffee and adrenaline, diving into the guts of the system. I found the problem, wrote a patch, and deployed it just minutes before we would have breached our SLA with our biggest client. I saved the company, conservatively, $10 million. The next day at the divisional all-hands meeting, Mark stood on stage. He talked about the challenge of the database failure. He said it was a tough weekend, but through strong leadership and decisive action, my team and I were able to navigate the crisis. He never mentioned my name. He took my 36 hours of sleepless, painstaking work and wrapped it up in a neat little bow called my leadership. I sat in the audience, invisible. I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck, but I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't personal. It was just business. You don't complain. You just work harder. You prove them wrong with results. Maya had her own story. She was the most brilliant database architect I had ever met. Her mind was a perfectly structured, indexed machine. 2 years ago, she designed a new data warehousing system that was so elegant, so efficient, it became the blueprint for the entire company's future data strategy. Mark had her present, the initial design to the senior architects, but when it came time to actually build it and lead the project, he gave the role to a man from another team, a guy named Kevin, who was famous for his golf handicap, not his coding ability. Mark's reasoning? Kevin had more management experience. What he meant was, Kevin was his friend. Maya was relegated to a consulting role on the project that was her own brainchild. She had to watch, day after day, as Kevin made basic mistakes, and then came to her in private to ask her how to fix them. She was the ghost in her own machine. Chloe, our UI's UX guru, had to fight for every pixel. She was the artist among us, the one who believed that software should not only be functional but beautiful. She fought for accessibility standards, for intuitive design, for the user. Mark saw all of this as slowing things down. He would dismiss her meticulously researched user feedback as anecdotal. In meetings, he would interrupt her, turning to a male engineer to ask, "So, can we just build the button and move on?" He treated her expertise as a hobby, a frivolous distraction from the real work of just shipping code, no matter how clunky or unusable it was. And Lena, our silent warrior, she was a master of quality assurance and cybersecurity. She saw vulnerabilities no one else could. She was quiet, yes, but when she spoke, it was with absolute precision. She had saved us from at least 3 major security breaches by catching things in staging that the automated scanners had missed. But in Mark's eyes, her quiet nature was a weakness. He constantly pushed her to be more visible, to market herself better. He didn't understand that Lena's value wasn't in her volume, it was in her substance. She was a deep river, not a babbling brook, and he was dying of thirst because he didn't know how to drink. We laid all these stories out on the table, like evidence in a trial. The pattern was undeniable. It wasn't incompetence, it was a system. Mark didn't want a team of equals. He wanted a team of subordinates, and he was particularly uncomfortable with women who didn't fit neatly into the boxes he had built for them. We weren't just a team, we were a threat to his worldview. And that brought us to Priya, shaking in her chair, ready to abandon a career she was born for, because one mediocre manager had decided she wasn't good enough. No, I looked at the faces of my team. Maya's simmering anger, Chloe's frustrated energy, Lena's quiet resolve, and Priya's flickering hope. I knew what we had to do. "It's not just about the reviews," I said, the words finally coming. "He doesn't respect the work because he doesn't understand the work. He can't see the complexity of what we do, so he judges us on things he can see, how we talk, how we dress, whether we laugh at his bad jokes. We can't win that game. So we have to change the game." The idea started as a joke. What if we all submitted the exact same list of accomplishments? I said it with a bitter laugh. "Just copy and paste it. Let's see what he does then." There was a beat of silence, then Maya leaned forward, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Oh, that's not a bad idea," she said. "That's a very, very good idea." Suddenly, the energy in the room crackled back to life. The despair was burning away, replaced by a cold, thrilling rage. We weren't victims anymore. We were conspirators. We spent the next hour sketching it out on a whiteboard. We would take the project description for Cerberus, the plumbing project, and we would write it up as a list of 5 key accomplishments. The exact same 5 accomplishments. Word for word, we would submit it as our individual contribution for the next performance cycle. We knew with absolute certainty that Mark would not give us the same rating. He didn't read our detailed reports. He skimmed. He would fall back on his own biases. He would tell me I was too aggressive. He would tell Priya she lacked confidence. He would tell Chloe she was unfocused, Maya that she wasn't a team player, and Lena that she was too quiet. He would give us 5 different ratings for 5 identical pieces of paper, and that would be our proof. Not an accusation, not a feeling, cold, hard, undeniable evidence of his bias. We would take those 5 reviews, with their 5 different ratings, and we would walk them directly into the office of the head of engineering. It was a risky plan. It was audacious. It was the kind of thing that could get us all fired. But as I looked around at my team, I saw the fear had been replaced by something else, a grim, exhilarating sense of purpose. We had been playing defense for years, trying to survive in a system that was rigged against us. It was time to go on the offensive. It was time to build a new system. This wasn't just about getting a better review. This was about taking control of the narrative. The seed of the plan was planted, and over the next 6 months, we would water it in secret, waiting for the perfect moment to let it bloom. The plan to submit identical reviews was the skeleton key, but we all knew it wasn't enough. Presenting evidence of bias to the head of engineering, a formidable woman named Evelyn Reed, might get Mark a slap on the wrist. It might even get him fired, but it wouldn't fundamentally change our position. We would still be Team 7, the plumbers in the cave. We needed more than just justice. We needed leverage. We needed a weapon, and as it turned out, we had been building one all along. This is the part of the story that never appeared in any official report. It was the subplot, the secret project we had been working on in the shadows for the better part of a year. It started organically, born out of our own frustration, as the team responsible for cleaning up Omnicore's messiest code. We felt the pain of technical debt every single day. We were constantly battling inefficient algorithms, outdated libraries, and undocumented spaghetti code. It was like being asked to perform surgery with a spoon. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal week, trying to trace a bug through a labyrinth of nested conditionals, Chloe threw her hands up in the air. "This is insane," she'd said. "We spend 80% of our time just trying to understand what the hell this code is even supposed to do. A human shouldn't be doing this. A machine should be doing this." A light bulb went on in my head. What if a machine could? That's how Athena was born. It started as a small, scrappy collection of scripts we wrote on our own time, during lunch breaks, and on weekends. I handled the core architecture, designing a system that could parse and analyze vast code bases. Maya built the brain, a sophisticated engine for identifying patterns and anti-patterns in the code. Chloe, a user experience genius, designed an intuitive interface that could visualize complex code structures, turning a mess of text into a clear, navigable map. Lena, our security hawk, focused on building modules that could automatically detect and flag potential vulnerabilities with a precision that dwarfed our expensive commercial software. And Priya, with her boundless energy and fresh perspective, became our secret weapon in research and development, constantly finding new academic papers and open-source tools we could integrate. Athena wasn't just a code linter or a simple analysis tool, it was revolutionary. It used a form of machine learning to not only identify problems, but to suggest optimal, refactored solutions. It could predict the performance impact of a code change before it was ever committed. It could automate the tedious, soul-crushing work of updating dependencies and patching legacy systems, freeing up engineers to do what they were actually hired to do: innovate. It was the solution to a problem that was costing Omnicore tens of millions of dollars a year in wasted engineering hours and system inefficiencies. It was the kind of technology that could change the entire industry, and nobody, least of all Mark, knew it existed. We built it in the shadows. We used our personal laptops. We set up a private repository on a server hosted in a different country. We communicated through encrypted messaging apps. It felt like a covert operation. It was our secret garden, the one place where our work couldn't be dismissed, misunderstood, or stolen. Working on Athena was our release valve. When the day-to-day grind of dealing with Mark's condescension became too much, we would retreat to our secret project. It reminded us of who we were. We weren't just janitors, we were architects. Our plan for the performance review now had a second, much more powerful layer. The identical list of accomplishments we were going to submit wouldn't just be a generic description of our official project, Cerberus, it would be a Trojan horse. We would describe our work in a way that on the surface looked like a standard project update. But to a trained eye, to someone who actually understood software architecture at a high level, it would be a clear and unmistakable description of Athena's core capabilities. We spent weeks crafting the 5 bullet points. They were masterpieces of corporate doublespeak. One bullet point read spearheaded a proactive code remediation initiative to align legacy systems with modern architectural paradigms, resulting in a significant reduction in systemic risk. To Mark, that would sound like impressive sounding fluff. To an expert like Evelyn Reed, it was a direct reference to Athena's automated refactoring engine. Another said, implemented a novel, heuristic-based framework for preemptive resource allocation analysis, optimizing computational overhead across distributed services. Mark would see buzzwords. Evelyn would see a description of our predictive performance modeling. Each point was a landmine, carefully buried under a layer of benign-looking soil. We were betting on Mark's arrogance and his technical incompetence. We knew he wouldn't ask clarifying questions because that would require him to admit he didn't understand. He would do what he always did, ignore the substance and judge the style. He would judge us. To make our case even stronger, we needed an ally on the inside, someone who could provide context and corroborate the scale of the problem Athena solved. That ally was David Chen. David was a principal architect, a legend at Omnicore who had been there since the beginning. He was quiet, brilliant, and universally respected. He was also deeply frustrated with the direction the company was headed. He saw the rot of mediocrity and politics spreading, championed by managers like Mark. I had worked with David on a few projects before and had a deep respect for him. I decided to take a calculated risk. I invited him for coffee, away from the office. I didn't tell him everything, not at first. I just started by talking about the challenges with the legacy codebase, the frustrations of technical debt. I watched his reaction. He wasn't just agreeing, he was finishing my sentences. He was feeling the same pain, so I showed him, not the whole system, just a small piece. I pulled out my personal laptop and showed him a visualization Chloe had designed, a 3D map of one of our most tangled code bases. Red lines indicated security risks, yellow for inefficiencies, blue for outdated dependencies. Then I clicked a button. The map resolved itself, the lines untangling, the colors shifting to a calm, uniform green. This is what Athena could do. David stared at the screen for a full minute. He didn't say a word. Then he closed the laptop, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "How much of the company's code base have you mapped?" "About 70%, I replied. His eyebrows shot up, and the vulnerability scans. Lena's module is finding critical level exploits that our commercial tools have missed for 5 years, I said. He leaned back and let out a long, slow whistle. You know what you have here, Sabrina. This isn't a project. This is the Holy Grail. Evelyn Reed has been trying to get a handle on our technical debt for 2 years. She's budgeted $30 million for a multi-year overhaul. You've built a tool that could do it in 6 months for the cost of a few servers." He knew the risks. He knew what we were doing was technically against the rules. Building a project of this scale on our own time, even on our own hardware, was a gray area. Legally, Some companies would claim it as their intellectual property, regardless. The term for it is a plausible inaccuracy in corporate policy, something HR could argue either way, depending on who they wanted to win. We were banking on the idea that possession is 9/10 of the law, and that demonstrating its overwhelming value would be our best defense. David agreed to be our silent partner. He didn't help us build Athena, but he gave us something just as valuable: information. He started forwarding me internal reports, redacted emails, and budget meeting minutes. He was painting a picture for us of the exact corporate pain points that our secret weapon was designed to cure. He was giving us the ammunition we needed to not just make our case, but to make it undeniable. The 6 months leading up to the next review cycle were the most intense of my life. By day, we were Team 7, the dutiful plumbers, closing tickets and keeping our heads down. We were a model team. We never complained. We never missed a deadline. We gave Mark absolutely no reason to suspect a thing. By night, we were the Furies, the architects of Athena, polishing our weapon, running it against more and more of the company's code, and building a mountain of data that would be our salvation. The day came to submit our accomplishments for the review. One by one, we opened the internal performance portal. We each had a copy of the text file on our desktops, 5 bullet points, 147 words. I copied the text. I pasted it into the form field. I clicked submit. A few desks away, I heard the faint click of Maya's mouse, then Chloe's, then Lena's, then Priya's. 5 identical submissions sent into the system. The trap was set. Now, all we had to do was wait for the animal to walk into it. We were no longer just trying to prove he was a biased manager. We were preparing to demonstrate that he was an obstacle to the future of the entire company. It wasn't about revenge. It was about demonstrating value so overwhelming that it created its own gravity. The week of the reviews arrived like a storm front, the pressure in the office dropping palpably. Mark sent out the calendar invites with his usual detached efficiency. My meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 10 a.m. I was first. He was making a point, establishing the hierarchy: lead engineer, first in the firing line. The other women were scattered throughout the week, a classic divide and conquer tactic. He didn't want us comparing notes in the hallway between sessions. Little did he know, we had been comparing notes for 6 months. I walked into the conference room, the same glass box as before. Mark was in his usual spot, oozing a kind of smug satisfaction. He gestured for me to sit. "Sabrina," he said, his voice smooth as oil, "let's get into it." He pulled up my review on the big screen. There it was, in black and white. My self-assessment, the 147 words we had so carefully crafted, and next to it, his evaluation. Overall rating, meets expectations. I kept my face a perfect mask of neutrality, but inside, a cold, bright flame of triumph ignited. He had taken the bait. He hadn't just taken it, he'd swallowed it whole. He launched into his feedback. "Sabrina, you continue to be a solid performer," he began, using the same tired script as last time. "But the feedback from your peers indicates that your leadership style can be abrasive. You have a tendency to take over conversations. You're ambitious, which is great, but you need to learn to build consensus rather than just driving for a solution. Remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint." He was critiquing a phantom. I had spent the last 6 months being the most collaborative, consensus-driven leader imaginable. I had deliberately stepped back, empowering Priya and the others, making sure their voices were heard. The feedback he was citing wasn't real. It was a projection of his own bias, a story he had already written in his head about sharp-edged women in tech. He hadn't read the words on the page. He had read me. I just nodded. Thank you for the feedback, Mark. I'll take that on board. I didn't argue. I didn't push back. I let him think he had won, that I was accepting his judgment. That was the most important part of the plan. Let him feel powerful. Let him dig his own grave. I walked out of the room and sent a single coded message to our encrypted group chat. The eagle has landed. One by one, the others had their turn. Maya's review was on Wednesday. She came back to the cave, her expression unreadable. She posted a screenshot in our chat. Her rating meets expectations. Mark's feedback, however, was a mirror image of mine. Maya, your technical skills are undeniable, but you need to be more of a team player. You tend to work in a silo. You're too quiet in planning sessions. We need you to step up and show more leadership initiative. For submitting the exact same work, I was too loud, and she was too quiet. Chloe's review was on Thursday morning. Her rating meets expectations. Her feedback, Chloe, your creativity is a real asset, but you can get distracted by the aesthetics. You need to focus more on the core deliverables and deadlines. Sometimes you lose sight of the business objectives in pursuit of a perfect design. He was twisting her greatest strength, her user-centric focus, into a weakness. Thursday afternoon, it was Lena's turn. Meets expectations. The feedback was almost comical in its predictability. Lena, your security audits are thorough, but you need to be more proactive in communicating your findings. You have to manage up more effectively. Don't just find problems, be more vocal about the solutions. The irony was suffocating. He wanted the quietest, most focused person on the team to become a marketing executive for her own work. The final piece fell into place on Friday morning with Priya. Her meeting was short. He probably saw it as an unimportant formality. She came back to the cave, her face pale, but her eyes were steady. She posted her review. Meets expectations. Mark's feedback, Priya. You've had a solid start, but you lack the confidence to take on more responsibility. You need to be more assertive. You're waiting to be told what to do. Find your voice. There it was, 5 identical submissions, 5 meets expectations ratings, and 5 completely different, contradictory, and gender-coded sets of feedback. I was too aggressive. Maya was too passive. Chloe was too flighty. Lena was too reserved. Priya was too timid. He hadn't reviewed our work. He had reviewed our womanhood, and he had found it wanting in 5 different ways. We spent the weekend compiling the dossier. We created a single, elegant PDF. Page 1 was the 147-word list of accomplishments. Pages 2 through 6 were the 5 official review documents, side by side, with his contradictory feedback highlighted in a stark, angry red. The evidence was pristine. It was irrefutable. It was beautiful. On Monday morning, at 9 a.m., I made the first move. I drafted an email to Evelyn Reed, the Executive Vice President of Engineering. I CC'd my entire team. I also BCC'd David Chen, our silent ally. The subject line was simple and professional. Request for performance review calibration engineering team. 7. The body of the email was just 3 sentences. Dear Evelyn, we are writing to request a calibration meeting regarding our team's most recent performance reviews. We have attached the relevant documents for your preliminary consideration. We believe they reveal a significant disconnect that we would like to discuss at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Sabrina, Maya, Chloe, Lena, and Priya. I attached the PDF. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. I looked up from my screen. Across the cave, 4 other faces were looking back at me, their expressions a mixture of terror and exhilaration. I gave them a small, firm nod, and I clicked send. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of despair anymore. It was the silence of a clock ticking down. We didn't have to wait long. Within 10 minutes, an automated notification popped into all of our inboxes. Meeting accepted, performance calibration. Today, 2 p.m. It was from Evelyn Reed's executive assistant. She had cleared her schedule. She was taking this seriously. Then the second email arrived, this one only to Mark's direct reports. It was a meeting invitation from Mark. You are Gent, Team Sync, 11 a.m. The panic had begun. He knew. He must have received a notification from Evelyn's office, a summons to the 2 p.m. meeting. He was scrambling. We all walked into his glassbox conference room at 11 a.m. sharp. For the first time, Mark looked small. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a twitchy, nervous energy. His eyes darted between the five of us. So he started, his voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. I just heard from Evelyn's office. Looks like we have a meeting with her this afternoon. Anyone have any idea what that's about? The five of us just looked at him. We didn't speak. We had agreed on this strategy. Absolute silence. Let him talk. Let him fill the void. The silence stretched. It became uncomfortable. He started to sweat, a small bead forming on his temple. Okay, well, he continued, fumbling with a pen. I just wanted to touch base. Make sure we're all aligned before we go in there. I think we had a really productive review cycle. Lots of good, constructive feedback. He was trying to frame the narrative, to get us to agree with his version of events before we walked into that room with Evelyn. We remained silent. We just stared. It was the most powerful thing we could have done. Our silence was a wall he couldn't break through. His bluster, his charm, his authority, it all just dissipated against that quiet, unified front. He was used to us arguing, defending, explaining. He wasn't prepared for us to simply refuse to engage. His panic escalated. He started talking faster, his words stumbling over each other. Look, if anyone has any concerns about their review, my door is always open. We can have a follow-up conversation. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe I wasn't clear. Performance reviews are a two-way street. He was drowning, and we were not throwing him a rope. We just sat there, 5 statues, watching him unravel. The man who had judged us, who had critiqued our very personalities, was now completely undone by our collective silence. This was the silent takeover. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet, inexorable collapse of his authority. The foundation of his power was our compliance, and we had just withdrawn it. The meeting ended with him sputtering, having received nothing from us. He dismissed us with a wave of his hand, his face pale. We walked out of his office, not saying a word, until we were back in the safety of the cave. The first tremor had hit. The main earthquake was scheduled for 2 p.m. The walk to Evelyn Reed's office felt like a scene from a movie. We moved as a unit, 5 women in a silent procession down the long, carpeted hallway of the executive floor. The air up here was different, quieter, cooler, smelling faintly of expensive cleaning products and power. People turned to look at us as we passed. A whole team being summoned to the EVP's office was not a normal occurrence. We were a spectacle, an anomaly, but for the first time, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. Evelyn's office was at the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. She was standing by the window when we entered, a tall, imposing figure with short silver hair and an expression of intense focus. Mark was already there, perched nervously on the edge of a sleek leather chair, looking like a schoolboy who had been called to the principal's office. He didn't look at us. Evelyn turned, and her eyes, a sharp, intelligent gray, swept over the five of us. She didn't smile. She just gestured to the chairs around the large, circular table. "Please, sit." The moment we were all settled, she got straight to the point. "I received your email," she said, her voice calm and even. "I've reviewed the documents you sent." She picked up a printed copy of our dossier from her desk. It was already covered in her notes, written in a precise architectural script. "I have to say, it's compelling." She looked directly at Mark. "Mark," she said, "can you walk me through your assessment process for Team 7? Mark visibly flinched. He launched into a torrent of corporate speak about holistic evaluations, 360-degree feedback, and a commitment to fostering growth. It was a smokescreen, and we all knew it. Evelyn let him talk for a full minute before holding up a hand to stop him. "Let's be more specific," she said, her voice cutting through his fluff. She turned to the first page of her notes. "Sabrina, you rated her meets expectations, and your feedback states she is too ambitious and abrasive. Is that correct?" Mark nodded, trying to look authoritative. "Yes, there have been some peer feedback." Evelyn didn't let him finish. She flipped the page. "Maya, you also rated her meets expectations, but your feedback says she is too quiet and needs to show more initiative. How is it that two members of the same team, who submitted identical accomplishments, can be both too aggressive and too passive at the same time?" Mark's face went from pale to a blotchy red. He stammered, "Well, it's about their individual roles, their personalities." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "This is a performance review, Mark, not a personality contest." "This document," she said, tapping our identical list of accomplishments, "is either the work of one person or it is the collective work of the team. In either case, giving 5 different contradictory evaluations for the same stated output is at best gross incompetence. At worst," she let the word hang in the air, "at worst it is clear, demonstrable bias." This was the moment. The first part of our plan had succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. We had him cornered, but this was also the moment to deploy our secret weapon. "Evelyn," I said, speaking for the first time, "the issue here is deeper than Mark's biased assessment. The truth is he didn't give us contradictory ratings for the same work. He gave us contradictory ratings because he had no idea what the work actually was." I took a deep breath. "Those 5 bullet points aren't just a project summary, they are a functional specification, and we'd like to show you what they specify." I pulled my laptop from my bag, connected it to the large monitor on her wall, and for the first time, I showed Athena to someone outside our small circle of trust. I brought up the visualization of the company's codebase, the chaotic tangle of red and yellow lines. I saw Evelyn lean forward, her eyes instantly locking onto the screen. She understood. She saw the multi-million-dollar problem we were displaying in stark, undeniable terms. "This," I said, "is Omnicore's technical debt. This is the reason our product cycles are slow, our servers are overloaded, and our engineers are burning out. We've spent the last year mapping it." Then I turned to the others. "Maya, talk about the analytics engine. Chloe, show her the UI. Lena, explain the security implications. Priya, run the refactoring simulation." One by one, my team, the team Mark had called timid and unfocused and abrasive, stood up and presented their work with a level of expertise and passion that filled the room. They were brilliant. They were confident. They were a symphony of competence. We ended with the final reveal. I clicked the button. The chaotic map of code on the screen resolved itself into a clean, green, orderly structure. This, I said, is Athena. It's an automated system that can do in months what your $30 million overhaul plan projected would take 3 years. The 5 of us built it. This is the work Mark evaluated as meets expectations. The silence in the room was absolute. Evelyn was staring at the screen, her expression a mixture of awe and fury. Mark looked like he had been punched in the gut. He was completely, utterly exposed, not just as a biased manager, but as a technically illiterate fool who had been sitting on a gold mine and had been too arrogant to even realize it was there. He finally found his voice, and it was laced with desperation. This is company property," he blurted out. "They built this on company time. I mentored them on this project." I just looked at him. "No, Mark, you didn't. We built this on our own time, on our own machines. We have the commit logs, the server records, and the time-stamped documentation to prove it. You have never seen this before in your life." Evelyn turned her head slowly, fixing Mark with a gaze so cold it could have frozen lava. "Is that true, Mark? Did you have any knowledge of Project Athena?" He couldn't lie. Not now. The evidence was too overwhelming. He just shook his head, a tiny, defeated gesture. Evelyn stood up. She walked over to the monitor, her eyes tracing the clean lines of the refactored code. She turned back to us, and for the first time, a small, grim smile touched her lips. "Ladies," she said, "I believe we have a great deal more to discuss." She then looked at Mark. "Mark, you are excused. We will have a separate conversation later, with HR." He practically stumbled out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, and with that sound, the entire power dynamic of the engineering division shifted on its axis. We hadn't just won an argument. We had demonstrated a value so immense that the old rules no longer applied. We hadn't just survived. We had taken over. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. Mark was placed on administrative leave that same afternoon, a corporate euphemism for being fired in slow motion. He was escorted from the building by security, carrying his career in a small cardboard box. We never saw him again. News of his departure spread through the division like a shockwave, but the real earthquake was yet to come. Evelyn Reed was a builder, not a politician. She saw the value in Athena immediately, not just as a tool, but as a strategic asset that could leapfrog Omnicore ahead of its competitors. The meeting in her office transformed from a disciplinary hearing into a high-level strategy session. She didn't just listen to us. She asked questions, challenged our assumptions, and treated us not as subordinates, but as the experts we were. By the end of the day, she had made a decision. She announced the creation of a new independent R&D group within the company, the Engineering Efficiency Group. Its sole mission was to develop and deploy Athena across the entire organization, and she put me in charge. Not as a lead engineer, as the director. The offer left me breathless. It was a 3-level promotion, a jump that would normally take a decade, if it happened at all. My team received promotions as well. Maya became a principal architect. Chloe was made head of engineering experience. Lena became the new director of application security. And Priya, the junior engineer, who had almost quit, was promoted to senior engineer and given the lead role on the core Athena algorithm team. We were given a new, dedicated office space, a bright, airy lab on the executive floor, right down the hall from Evelyn herself. We were given a multi-million-dollar budget and the authority to requisition any resources we needed. We were handed the keys to the kingdom, but our victory wasn't just about titles and budgets. It was about the exodus that followed. As word of Athena and our new group spread, something remarkable happened. The best and brightest engineers at Omnicore, the ones who had been languishing under managers like Mark, started reaching out. They didn't want to work on the sexy new products anymore. They wanted to work on something that mattered. They wanted to work for us. They saw a team built on merit, not politics. They saw a future. Our small team of 5 quickly grew to 15, a hand-picked group of the most talented engineers in the company. We hadn't actively poached anyone. We had simply built something so compelling that the talent came to us. The desperate counterattack from the old guard was almost pathetic. A few of Mark's allies in management tried to block our resource requests, citing procedural rules. Evelyn shut them down with a single, sharp email. They tried to argue that Athena should be absorbed into an existing team, to be managed by a more experienced leader. Evelyn announced our new group at the next divisional all-hands meeting, putting us on stage and calling our work the future of Omnicore. They tried to whisper in the hallways that we had stolen the idea, that our success was a fluke. But the results spoke for themselves. Within 3 months of deployment, Athena had reduced critical system outages by 90%. We were saving the company $1 million a week in cloud computing costs alone. You can't argue with numbers like that. The final, satisfying nail in the coffin was the intellectual property debate. As we knew he would, Mark, through his lawyers, made a desperate claim that since we were employees, Athena belonged to the company, and he deserved credit for fostering the environment that created it. This is where David Chen's information and our own foresight paid off. Omnicore, like many tech companies, had a clause in its employment agreement about inventions. It's a tricky piece of legalese, often deliberately vague, but we had found an obscure bylaw in the corporate charter, an innovation initiative clause added years ago to encourage skunkworks projects. It stipulated that any invention developed entirely on personal equipment and outside of core business hours could, under certain circumstances, remain the intellectual property of the inventors, who would then grant the company an exclusive license. It was a legal loophole so small you could barely see it, but it was there. By presenting Athena as a finished product and offering a license, rather than just handing over the code, we had positioned ourselves not as employees, but as partners. Evelyn's legal team, seeing the immense value of the technology, advised her to accept our terms. We were granted a significant block of stock options tied directly to the performance metrics of Athena. We weren't just employees anymore. We were owners. The power shift was complete. It wasn't just that we had won, the entire definition of power in the engineering division had changed. It was no longer about who you played golf with. It was about what you could build. The loudest voice in the room culture was being replaced by a culture of quiet competence. We had started a revolution without ever raising our voices. We just showed our work. The final confrontation, if you could even call it that, was almost anticlimactic. A few weeks after he was fired, Mark sent me a long, rambling email. It was a bizarre mix of threats, pleas, and self-pity. He accused me of ruining his career. He begged me to tell Evelyn it was all a misunderstanding. He said he had a family to support. It was the desperate cry of a man who had lost a game he didn't even know he was playing. I read the email, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction, just emptiness. He was irrelevant. His chapter was over. I archived the email without a reply. The real vindication didn't come from his downfall. It came from the quiet moments in our new reality. It came from seeing Priya confidently leading a design meeting with senior architects, her voice clear and steady. It came from watching Chloe and Maya whiteboard a new feature, their creative energies flowing without interruption. It came from a quiet nod of respect from Evelyn as she passed our lab. It came from looking at the work we were doing, the elegant solutions we were building, and knowing that we had created this space for ourselves. We had built our own world, a world that ran on logic, merit, and mutual respect. One afternoon, Evelyn stopped by our lab. She didn't say anything, just stood there watching my team work. They were deep in a collaborative coding session, passing a keyboard back and forth, sentences flowing from thought to code, a seamless dance of intellect. She watched them for a few minutes, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, Sabrina," she said quietly, so only I could hear, "the biased reviews were the reason I brought you in here, but they're not the reason you're in charge. I've dealt with a dozen managers, like Mark, they're a cancer, and you cut them out. What's rare, what I almost never see, is a team that has the foresight to not only diagnose the disease, but to have already synthesized the cure. You didn't just bring me a problem. You brought me a solution to a problem I didn't even know how to properly define." She looked around the room, at the thriving ecosystem we had built. "This," she said, "this is the new standard." That was our vindication. It wasn't seeing Mark fall. It was the realization that we had raised the bar for everyone. It wasn't about revenge. It was about building something so good, so undeniable, that the old broken system simply had to be demolished to make way for it. We were no longer the Furies, defined by our anger at the injustice. We were Team Athena, defined by the brilliant, world-changing thing we had built together. The new reality wasn't just that we had a seat at the table. We had designed and built a whole new table, and we were deciding who got to sit there. Today, when I walk into our lab, the first thing I see is a framed document on the wall. It's not a patent or an award. It's a copy of our performance review submission, those 5 bullet points, those 147 words. To anyone else, it's just a meaningless block of corporate text. To us, it's a declaration of independence. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is the one that no one else in the room is smart enough to understand. It's a symbol of our quiet victory, a testament to the fact that we didn't smash the glass ceiling. We reverse engineered it, found its structural flaws, and built a door right through it. It was never about revenge. I know I've said that a few times, and maybe you don't believe me. That's okay. You can call it what you want. But for us, it was about something more fundamental. It was about reclaiming our own narrative. For years, our story was being written for us by people like Mark. We were abrasive or quiet or distracted. We were footnotes in someone else's success story. The most radical thing we did was decide to pick up the pen and write our own story in our own language. The world is full of people who will try to define you, to put you in a box that makes them feel comfortable. They'll tell you you're too much of this or not enough of that. They will judge your style because they are incapable of understanding your substance. They will try to shrink you down to fit their own small worldview, and you can spend your life fighting them on their terms, playing their rigged game, or you can do something else. You can go silent. You can go to work. You can build something so powerful, so brilliant, so undeniably excellent, that it creates its own gravity. You can build a truth that forces the world to bend to its reality. Our story is not unique. It's happening in offices, labs, and studios all over the world. It's happening to anyone who has ever had their work stolen, their voice silenced, or their value erased. If you are one of those people, know this: your work has a voice. Your competence is a weapon. Don't waste your energy trying to convince the willfully blind to see. Focus on building. Focus on creating. Build your own leverage. Build your own network. Build your own truth. And when the time is right, don't just present your case, present your masterpiece. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated, please like this video and leave a comment below. It helps more than you know to hear from others who have walked a similar path. Share this with anyone you think might need to hear it. And if you want more stories about turning the tables and reclaiming your power, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's time we all started writing our own stories.